Hey everyone, Margarita here. I want to talk in this video about the probation officer who was in charge of my criminal charges in the Monroe County Court in Michigan after the DUI that I got, which was all a fraudulent setup. And so this video is basically a second part to the most recent video that I released. So if you didn't watch that video first, go watch that video first. I did mention in that video that I left out quite a few details pertaining to how I got this DUI, the overall structure of this setup, and who all was involved. I've left a lot of that information out for numerous reasons at this point. I can't fully talk about it. Now, if you've watched my other videos, you're going to realize in all these videos how sick I've been and me talking about how sick I've been. And then people say, oh, well, then you're obviously out drinking a lot and you got a DUI and blah, 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 blah. That's not the reality of my situation. I don't generally drink. And if I do, it's not very much. And because of my condition, it wasn't possible to drink at all for several years. And so when I do it, it was only a small amount. And because of the condition itself, I can't process any toxins. That includes alcohol. So for somebody that's as injured as me and as sick as me, and what the actual problem is, if alcohol is added to my system, it amplifies that amount that would be calculated when, let's just say it's a breathalyzer test or a blood test, doesn't really matter. It amplifies that amount versus if somebody who didn't have what's wrong with me, if they drank the same amount that I did, it probably wouldn't even register as over the legal limit for that person. And it's specifically due to how overloaded with carbon monoxide my system is, and how every toxin affects my system as a whole, because this pertains to every toxin. It's not just one or another. So, when it comes to all that, no, I don't actually really drink. But I did used to own a waitressing and bartending company a long time ago. And the night that I was doing this party, that's what I was doing that specific night. I no longer operate the business. I have not in a long time. And I can't, because I also can't punch a clock or schedule things and then make those appointments because of my injuries and the ongoing effects. So I no longer operate the business. I did so just this one time as a favor. And even then, I got really sick that morning and I was barely able to make it. I was running late. It's really hard to do. So, no, I don't generally drink. But there were several sets of circumstances that when you combine them all together, that's how a DUI occurred. Now, these were all crimes. These are setups. These are part of the RICO crimes, and there shouldn't have been a DUI. So I will get more into what happened during all this in future videos after arrests are made. But as for now, I have to leave out a lot of these details. Yeah, go back, watch the first video, and then come back to this one, and it'll make more sense. So at some point, the probation officer by the name of Stephanie Pride then gets my case, because initially it was somebody else. And even the first person that had the case, her name was Cassandra something. I can't remember her last name, but she had it first. And she was also not living in reality or listening to anything that was going on or accepting my situation as facts. She was acting like, because I'm walking around and I'm not in a hospital, that can't be my situation or what's going on with me. Because at the time that this all began, there was a train explosion in Ohio, about 190 miles from my house in Ohio, because I was at my house in Ohio when all this got to this point. So this is the beginning of 2023 when all this started in this manner, even though the incident had occurred about 6 months prior. Nothing came of it for quite some time. So at the time this all happened, it was the beginning of 2023, and I was living in my house in Ohio. Because of that train explosion and my already existing condition, those particles were extremely lethal to mine and my son's health, and it made us extremely sick just by my son had left the front door open the one night after we came in, and I woke up and went to shut it, and I was violently vomiting for days. Like I couldn't even make it to the bathroom. So that is what the effects are from those particles from that train explosion. And people that don't have a medical condition were experiencing those severe effects and more. Because my house was so far from there, nobody was comprehending, because I wasn't near where the train explosion happened. No one was comprehending how I could be that sick or how those particles could injure me, being so far away. And then when I reached out to several epidemiologists in the Ohio area, I was explaining my original injury, what I'd been through, and how many spills I had already been through. And now there's this explosion. This is not the first time I'm going through a situation, an environmental situation, as a secondary type injury to my already existing injury. And those people understood what I was talking about once I got further into depth on what I had been dealing with. So these are just people that work for the health department in each area, because I've had to deal with this numerous times in numerous areas at this point where I'm at today. But when I was talking to the initial probation officer, she's not educated enough to even understand what I'm talking about. So she was assuming that these epidemiologists were an actual doctor that I'm a patient of, not that these people work for the city. I wouldn't be seeing them. They're not writing medical documentation. And because of how severe the injuries are, and I had been left that way for so many years and so sick for so many years, fighting to stay alive with no quality of life, they weren't comprehending that any of that was my situation. And they were acting like whatever I was saying was in the past and it wasn't in the current. When every person I've talked to along the way, I make it very clear that this is my current situation. This isn't something that happened in the past. I'm still dealing with all of this. I'm still under treatment, treating the initial medical emergency, and I'm very sick and injured. And the whole reason I was forced away from my home and put in my home in Ohio was because of a different spill that happened caused by Ford Motor Company, where my house is in Flat Rock. So when I try to explain that a catastrophic injury had occurred back in 2018, after I'd already given birth while suffering from the carbon monoxide poisoning in 2016, and now there's numerous brain injuries and systemic injuries, and how much we had already lost. And when I try to explain where I am in the current, so at this time it was the beginning of 2023, and I'm trying to explain what had all gone on, and it was catastrophic disaster with the next catastrophic disaster. And my mother's at the root of this, placing delusional phone calls to every agency and all these different people in the mix of all of this. She just catches wind, obviously the thing with Flat Rock in my house in the city and Ford, that was all on the news. So she was able to easily insert herself in that. Doesn't matter that nobody was giving her direct information. She's getting it from the news. And that's what forced me down to the other home. So then I'm in this home and the train explosion happens. And I couldn't even breathe the air to go outside, couldn't even go outside to cut my grass, couldn't be out there at all. And it was very hard to drive from point A to point B. Getting further away from it back up into Michigan wasn't as bad, but we have problems running the ventilation in our car when these spills or explosions happen. So at this point, I had been through 2 chemical spills, a gas spill, and now this train explosion. So I have to learn how each one is going to affect me, because each one is different particles, different chemicals, different gases, and I have to learn as I go. Some of them are a lot more lethal. They all have different feelings, although they all load up into my brain and they all flood my system. So when I was explaining this to her, she was acting like what I was saying wasn't reality because I'm not at a hospital. She was also assuming, which I believe this is most of the population, because I'll do a separate video on this, but people are assuming because if you're that injured and sick, you just go to the hospital and get help. And that's not how this goes. That's not what's going on in my case. There's a lot of criminal matters that have happened. My mother's at the root of them as a hospital employee for 45 years, and our medical records are falsified. So there's 2 separate problems. That is one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is the medical system does not know how to treat a carbon monoxide poisoning as extreme as mine, with the ongoing effects, especially after somebody's brain tissue has been destroyed throughout the entire brain. They also don't know how to treat that either. So when somebody is really that sick and injured and you're trying to tell somebody else the situation, they're not comprehending reality, because they just believe that you go to the hospital and you get help and then that's it. That's not what's going on here. I was left for dead from day one in 2018 when it became an extreme medical emergency. There was no help. I was left to die. And the only reason we're alive is because I began treatment at the private facility in 2019 and continued on with treatment all those years daily to barely get me to where I was when I was eventually forced down to my house in Ohio in 2022. So I had been through years of loss of life, loss of quality of life, extreme symptoms day in and day out, no relief, no help from the medical system. I was never treated on an inpatient basis when this was a fully inpatient injury. And that never happened. And it should have been. And this is all part of the crimes that my mother's at the root of as well. So here I am trying to explain this again to somebody else, and they're not comprehending that I'm having trouble. I can't even get to the corner store to get a Pepsi or a Coke to settle my stomach from the violent vomiting I was experiencing just from those couple breaths of breathing the air, just coming close to my door to shut it. So that went on in that manner for a couple months at that time from that train explosion. Because when there is explosions and spills, that stuff has to dissipate and slowly spread outwards until it eventually dissipates. That's how things work. It's common sense. I don't know why everybody has such a hard time comprehending this. So it doesn't matter if it's an explosion out in the air or if it's a large chemical spill or a gas spill and it goes into the sewer system, and natural precipitation eventually slowly spreads it out, or there can be flushing that they do intentionally to help spread it out. People aren't comprehending that that's how things dissipate. So my house being 190 miles from the site of this caused a very severe issue with people comprehending what I've already been going through and what's going on and how this affects me each time there's a spill or an explosion of some sort. There's a problem. So me trying to explain this to her, she wasn't comprehending any of it. She was acting like I'm just a regular person walking around. There's no issue. And oh, you just go get a doctor's note and that's it. Because I was being required to do things that I couldn't do or make it over here to this place or that place when I couldn't do that. And on top of the fact that Ford's remnants of gases were still floating around basically on my general drive in between my two houses. So this is why I was removed from the area and put down at my house in Ohio, where I stayed put for some time. And even when I did start traveling to Michigan, again, after my dad got injured, I was west of where I was traveling to initially. So it was not I wasn't traveling over the waterways where it had all spilled. So it was really 2 years from this time the spill happened before I was actually driving through it again, which was around the time it did eventually clear. That original spill cleared. And so when I'm trying to explain over the phone, this most recent explosion and why I can't get from point A to point B, which this has been known my entire injury, initially for several years, I couldn't go anywhere if you wanted me to. It didn't matter that you wanted me to be somewhere. I couldn't do it. I was barely holding on to life and barely getting myself to and from work, the little bits that I was. And at no time should I have ever been standing or working or driving. And the only reason I was doing that because I knew we weren't going to live. I knew if I didn't at least try to get the money, working the little tiny bit that I was, that we weren't going to live. And I also couldn't do anything else. So for those 4 years, I literally didn't do anything else. I didn't do anything within the household. I wasn't doing anything at all. All I was doing was getting myself there for 4 or 5 hours, 1 or 2 nights a week, sometimes not at all. And then I'd get myself back home and I'd be incapacitated, laid out the entire week until the following weekend would roll around and I'd have to do it again. That went on in that manner for me from the time of my injury in January 2018 all the way until, COVID happened. So when COVID happened, then I got the full pay to stay home for 16 months. That's how I got through the bulk load of daily treatments and paid all my bills and got what little bit of rest I did, although it wasn't proper because of the delusions being screamed in my face at that time by everybody living in my household, which my mother was at the root of controlling all of that. And then returning to work after COVID, I was just more steadily able to maintain working those shifts, and I just wasn't missing shifts every weekend. So because I required minimally at least 2 shifts to maintain all of my bills and my treatment at that time, and my son's treatment, it was minimally I had to work those 2 shifts, sometimes a third, in order to pick up all the pieces, keep ourselves alive, maintain the treatment, maintain the bills. Because this is different than somebody else who works, somebody has an injury, they work for somebody else. They're thinking like 9 to 5 or 40 hours a week. That's not my situation. That was never my situation. I'm 100% self-employed. So it's a lot different when you're comparing what I've been through in me working with a severe injury, because I have to be able to control if or when I can go somewhere, because it's not always, it's not up to me. So if there's, depending on the weather, depending on companies that spill, depending on the conditions outside, if there's any flushing going on, there's all these factors involved when it comes to if I can go somewhere or if I can leave home. And then if I'm able to even get to work and do 4 to 6 hours of me working and then get myself back home. There's a lot involved in if I'm even able to do that. So if I make one wrong move throughout the week, or if I take one wrong trip from point A to point B, if I have one exposure, I wouldn't be able to go to work that following weekend. So I stayed in that manner for a very long time. And when I'm trying to explain this to these women, they were not comprehending anything I was saying, that that's not possible. You're not listening to what I've been through every step of the way, barely keeping us alive, and then barely getting to treatment each day during the week, and then going through each weekend. It was literally taking every ounce of energy I had to get through each weekend, just doing 1 or 2 nights per week, and then being completely laid out and not able to do anything else for the rest of the week. So that went on in my manner, in my life, in that manner for a very long time. And it is still the current situation. However, things have slightly shifted with how things are going on, the work that I'm doing, and how treatment is going. So it's a lot different today than it was at that time. But that is still the situation. So as I'm trying to explain to these women, because it was 2 separate times I had to explain this. The first one was not comprehending any of it whatsoever. She just kept acting like I needed to go get a doctor's note, which is how I ended up with so many different medical notes, which I read last year on my YouTube channel and released a video on my medical records and my doctor's notes, because I kept having to go get these notes because they weren't living in reality about what I was dealing with. Nobody was comprehending that this was an inpatient injury and it's being treated on an outpatient basis. And I'm extremely limited on functioning, and I shouldn't even be working. I'm only working to maintain the treatment and maintain what I'd built to that point in my life in order to not lose anything further, because I'm the one who's provided everything I have. And after taking several losses and starting over from nothing due to my mother's crimes. So I knew that if I didn't attempt to get the money, we also still weren't going to survive, because we also at no point can receive treatment within the traditional medical system. Not only that, but the traditional medical system is not treating our degree of injuries. So explaining this to these women, they were not comprehending what I was dealing with. They weren't comprehending the brain injury aspect of all of it, because then I was placed on a blower that I was supposed to blow in like every, I don't know if it was like every 6 hours or so. But because of the brain injuries and everything I'd been through up until that point, I'm living with an injury, numerous injuries at this point, with brain injuries that are controlling every aspect of my life. I don't have days. I don't have daily functioning. I still don't to this day. And it's been this way since 2018, the beginning of 2018. So this is the beginning of 2023. There's no days. There's no daily functioning. There's no sleep schedule. So if my brain has to shut off and sleep when my brain says it's time to shut off and sleep, it doesn't matter if I just woke up. It doesn't matter if I'm out somewhere. It was a very long road to get me to even be able to incorporate just going one place leisurely into my life. It took over 4 years to incorporate that into my life. And either way you look at this, treatment has to be maintained. So at this point, I'm still maintaining treatment at 1 treatment per week. And all the way up until that point, I had maintained treatment daily, and then about a year of 2 days a week. So treatment had never stopped at that point for all those years. In order to even go out a little bit into the world, that 1 treatment per week had to happen. And if that 1 treatment stops, then my work all stops, my flow of money stops, and then we slowly slide backwards until we're no longer alive. So that's the position I was in at that time. And no one was comprehending anything I was saying. So, I was just very sick, very unwell. I'm being forcefully woken up to blow into this blower. And at no time during my injury could I even be woken up if somebody wanted me to. So it was very extreme. It caused a lot of physical pain and suffering, physical distress, which I was in a continuous state of, and that was adding to it. So at no time should this blower have ever been given to me. There is no history of me having an alcohol problem or a drug problem. It's all been fabricated every step of the way due to my mother's crimes. So even if like some of this stuff you see on my record was on my record, it's still not factual information. These are false reports, false charges. She was able to orchestrate it over the course of time. So there was no history of any of that. And with what I had going on medically, it was not possible to disrupt my sleep and wake up and do these blows. And what was happening was it was causing financial loss because it was slowly taking me out to the point where I was starting to lose work because my sleep was being disrupted. And because I'm so chronically sick and I live with continuous symptoms, and then I have to incorporate any new exposures, that can just happen traveling from point A to point B. Or, like I was saying at this time, there had been another chemical spill, a large gas spill, and the train explosion. I'm having to incorporate that in also. So it was making me extremely sick. And I lived that way no matter what. So it was being amplified by these spills and explosions, and then the ongoing effects from the brain injuries. That's for life. And at the time, closer to 2018 to 2023, the effects from those brain injuries were very extreme because I also had 3 additional brain injuries. 2 of those were in 2023. One was in 2021. And then the extreme one that happened in 2018 and the initial one from 2016. So the amount of brain injuries that I had and the effects that I was suffering from just from the brain injuries alone, I was not able to wake up and blow into this blower, or I would miss them completely because my brain would be so injured and it was going on and on where I was extremely exhausted and wiped out, and it was already unable to be incorporated into my life, and I was being forced to incorporate it into my life, that it eventually led to like periods of unconsciousness, me not able to like wake up to even do it, because the alarm going off to do that was causing an extreme disruption on top of the extreme state that I was already in. So, with that all going on, it just had me on a downhill slope. And then I wasn't able to maintain as much work as I was because it was disrupting the little bit of sleep that I was like, if I woke me up from sleeping, then it would further disrupt my day, my week. It travels on and on and on. There's no, there aren't days and nights. It's an injury controlling every second of every day and night with no flow, no pattern, no schedule. There's no way around it. I was still in the initial extreme part of the medical emergency, coming out of that extreme part, but the sleep was still an issue. I still couldn't be woken up. So as this is going on, it's causing loss of income. It's causing me to be in a more extreme state. And then I'm explaining that these additional spills and explosions were creating a further issue. It's preventing me. Sometimes I have to shelter in place. It's preventing me from being able to leave, from being able to go from point A to point B. I can't get this done. You're demanding I go do this or go do that, and I can't. On top of, if I do just too much in a day or too much in a week, I'm then incapacitated for several days. I can't add more to the plate that I already have because I was already juggling 4 to 6 times more that I could handle from the beginning of my injury on. I never got situated. I never had rest or recovery or proper treatment. I didn't have a support system. It was extreme chaos on top of extreme harassment and crimes, and it kept going and going, and more would get added to it. And my mother was controlling all of this at the root, using all these people and agencies. So that was all going on at that time. And then once she found out that there were criminal charges, she then inserted herself in that situation, called the probation officer, where she then, was calling her regularly throughout the course of all of this. And that's what she does. She's been doing this for decades. So I already knew. So all that was going on. And I couldn't incorporate the things that they were trying to tell me I had to do. It wasn't possible to incorporate any of this into my life. Now, at this time, I had temporary tenants in my home. I'm temporarily away from my home due to that last large spill being right where my home was, and how long it was going to take to clear. And here I was having to provide some of the utilities, some of the money toward the utilities for that home, plus the home I'm living in, which it's not really that big of a deal because total, it still wasn't what I was paying by myself in the home by myself. So that wasn't the problem. The problem is more stuff was being added to my list of things that I had to take care of. And it was already an overloaded plate with more than I could handle. And they were adding more to it, which wasn't possible to handle because I'm also not working for somebody else. I'm generating 100% of my own income, permanently injured, permanently disabled, struggling to maintain that because I know that if I lose that, we still lose our lives. And that's why I had continued to do what I was doing. I wasn't receiving compensation from anyone, and I'm paying for treatment out of pocket. So, I'm not in the same boat as most people, and I'm very sick and injured, not supposed to be working. But this was the only way to keep us alive. This was the only way to build off of what I had and not lose anything further, because if I had stopped at that point, we would have already been deceased. If I had just given up right then and there, we both would have already been deceased. We wouldn't have even made it to where we are today. So I had all of that going on at one time. And when I was trying to explain to these two women what was going on, they weren't wanting to live in reality. And even though I'd have the doctors print another note, they didn't want to comprehend what I'd actually been through and what was actually going on. Now, at this time, here's my mother calling the probation officer in the background. She's calling Stephanie Pride regularly, telling her all of these delusions about me, making her believe I'm somebody that I'm not. I've always had this drug problem, this mental disorder, blah, 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 blah. I've always been this problem. I'm this mess. And this woman is buying it. She's buying all the bullshit. She's agreeing to participate in the crimes. And she even falsified a drug test on me prior to sentencing. So this drug test, so I'm going to show a picture of it. I have a picture of half of it because this was a 14 panel drug test. So I have one of the cards that is a 7 panel. I don't have a picture of the other one because what had happened was I was the last person in there for the day to show up for this test. So the whole place was getting ready to shut down. That means they saw a ton of people earlier that day who also had taken drug tests. Now, in that county, in that area in Michigan, there are a lot of people who are on drugs. Almost 100% of the people who are under some type of probation or whatever's going on in that area, they really are on drugs. And so there was plenty of people to come through the door that day and give their sample of urine that all tested positive for many substances, I'm assuming. And when I came in there, the whole place was getting shut down for the day, and it was like 4 p.m. And so when she took the sample and she put the 2 cards in the cup, first of all, the cup that I had peed in had left my line of sight, and it was on the other side of the wall in the bathroom for a good 30 seconds without me having eyes on it whatsoever. Ooh, hold on one second. Okay, so this sample had left my line of sight for about 30 seconds. And when I came onto the other side of the wall, she already had the 2 7-panel cards already in the cup. So when we come out of the bathroom, it shows that I'm positive for all these different substances that I knew that I didn't do. On top of, like, if you've been following my story and you've listened to what I've been through and what I just said in this video, I have a problem with all chemicals, toxins, and gases. I can't do drugs if I wanted to. I would have been deceased a long time ago. With the condition that I have and the treatment I'm undergoing and the fact that I've self-paid for all of it, somebody in that boat wouldn't be causing themselves to continuously suffer and put themselves in an extreme state on top of the way they're already living that way, and then self-pay to remove all this from their system over all these years and spend close to 200 grand. Nobody does that. Somebody wouldn't be doing that. If, it just doesn't add up. I wouldn't be doing that. So when she took the 2 cards and she put them in the cup and it came back with a positive result, it didn't just say like 1 or 2 things. I mean, it said like 5 or 6 different substances that I was on. Now, it should have showed at that time, should have showed positive for 3 because 2 of my medications, and I'm a medical marijuana card holder, and that's the only reason I was even able to um, get to work the little bit that I did and get the little bit of money I did to keep everything going and keep us alive. If I was not on those products, we wouldn't have survived the injury anyway. We would have been gone in 2019. So as soon as I became that injured, I did renew my medical marijuana card, which I already had previously, because I've always had a moderate case of scoliosis and I've always used my physical body to work. So I've had my card. I had my card for a long time. And then I didn't renew it. And then when I got injured in 2018, I renewed it. So in Michigan, where we live, that's legal. That substance is legal. It's legally able to show up on a drug panel. I am a true traditional medical marijuana patient. I had been for some time. This is not something I just made up. Because my symptoms are so extreme, they can be, and for a long time it was continuous that way. Before I had one day of relief, I wouldn't have been able to keep us alive or get that money. So that substance is allowed to be, I'm allowed to test positive for that substance. On top of that, I then have 2 additional prescriptions that I test positive for, which are in my medical file. And now one of those substances metabolizes as something different. So it showed up something different on the test than it would have, if your body didn't metabolize it. So it shows up slightly different. But either way, those 3 things should have been in my urine. And where we are today, one of those prescriptions has been removed due to how the DEA and how they're giving doctors orders on what they can and can't prescribe to people. And because I live with so much continuous pain and suffering, with my brain tissue raw and open, and I live that way, and then I have all these additional exposures, I have to go with the pain medication because I wouldn't be able to function at all again. We would still lose our lives, even with where we are today. So as of today, one of those scripts have been removed from my file, but at this time, so it was the medical marijuana and then 2 prescriptions from the doctor. Where we are today, one of those has been removed. So when I took this drug test and she stuck the cards in there and it showed up like 5 or 6 different substances, and because I only have a picture of one of those cards, I'm going to show the picture. Because I only have a picture of one of those cards, I don't have the other substances that they were trying to say that I was on, but it should be within that file. So I know that some of the people who have participated in these crimes are watching my videos, and then they all have some type of power and control and pull in all these areas. So if that record within that department, if my criminal record in that department is tampered with, and suddenly the results of these tests go missing at some point, it's because the people who participated in the crimes had then went and got their hands on the file after seeing my video, and they're making disappear some of the crimes they've committed, is what it is. So as of right now, I'm assuming this is in my file. I'm filming this January 24th, 2026. So as of right now, these are in the criminal file that they have there at the court. But after I release this video, if somebody goes looking and it goes missing, it's because they've pulled it. Now, this is one card right here. So I'm going to show it. And I just can't fully remember what substances were on the other card. But you can clearly see right here. Okay, so you can pause it and look at it if you need to. But it's showing that, because there's supposed to be 2 lines on each one. It's showing basically that they tried to say on this card that it's benzodiazepines, morphine, and oxycontin. And then the other card, I do remember them saying that it was gabapentin and I believe it was MDMA, I believe was one of them. And it was something else, but I can't remember what the other substance was. But so at that time, my actual prescriptions were Xanax and Norco and Motrin. So the benzo should be positive. And my Norco metabolizes into morphine. And so that's why it shows positive for morphine on this. There isn't an actual test to show it any other way. That's what they're going off of. So those technically should be positive based on my actual prescriptions. But for there to be all those additional substances, so like 3 extra substances that I did not ingest, for them to say that I'm positive for those doesn't make any sense, because if I did all of that, I would have been deceased. So like literally I can't do drugs. And I knew I didn't ingest anything. I knew I didn't take anything other than what I normally take. So I wish I had the picture of the other card to fully show it. But if you gather the file, if somebody investigates and you gather this file, you'll see how this was tampered with. So this woman had already received a phone call from my mother. So we are now talking about Stephanie Pride, the probation officer in the Monroe County Court. So she had already received a phone call from my delusional mother, already placing delusional phone calls, giving her a whole false narrative about me, how I'm on all these drugs. All you got to do is make sure she tests positive for all these drugs. All we got to do is get her locked up, and then we'll gain access to the rest of this trust fund. So I knew she was already taking calls regarding that about me. And this is what made her believe that she could just get away with tampering with the drug test, showing that I'm on all these drugs, and then that would be it. It'd be a lot easier to lock me up. Well, I already know how my mother operates. I'm very well aware of this. I've been dealing with this for decades. So I already knew she was going to be calling this woman, telling her all this bullshit. And so that's what made her feel that she could get away with this, and that she could just take anybody's pee from that day, because there's so many people who had already come through the door who've already tested positive, that all it would take is just a little bit, add a little bit to my cup, which would only take like 5 to 10 seconds. And then it would just show positive on my card, which is kind of why some of the lines on the tests, they're not like full lines. They're kind of like half-ass lines. And it's because it wasn't throughout the whole cup of urine. She just added a little bit to it is what it was. And then she was able to do that when the cup left my line of sight for those 30 seconds. You know, she could have had it in there from the person before me, or I don't know, it could have been way earlier that day. It doesn't really matter. And all she had to do was add it to it. So then it looks like, when they send it off to the lab and I sign it and they seal it in front of me, well, the cup already left my line of sight where this substance, this extra pee, was added into the cup. And then it got sent to the lab, and they're saying, see, it's positive for all these things that went to a lab. Well, it was tampered with before that. So I knew right away, because I've been dealing with this my whole life, I went and got my own drug test. And what these people didn't realize is that I also do a monthly drug test at my doctor's office every month when I get refills, which happened to be like 2 days before this. So that drug test already exists. It had been for years since my injury, and it shows what it normally shows every month. That's at my primary doctor's office. At the same time this was happening, I was also getting ready to do yearly blood work at this time, and I had not gone yet. So at the time that this happened, and I was aware that it was falsified, I just couldn't comprehend in the moment how exactly it was done. I wasn't really thinking too much about how it was done, because I was living in extreme chaos at this moment. All I was thinking about was, I've got to get myself to go do the blood work, and I'll have them add in the additional stuff to check for. And then sorry, hold on a second. Okay, so yeah, so then I figured I would just have them add in the additional stuff to check for, and then I would be able to prove it with a regular blood test at a different facility, because I couldn't do the blood work at my primary doctor's office. I had to go to a third-party facility. So now I have the original drug test from a couple days prior. That's normal, the way it should be, which there's never been any indication that I've ever taken anything than what I'm prescribed all these years. So I've been seeing the same doctor since 2021. Prior to that, I had the same doctor from 2017 to the time I got the new doctor. There'd never been anything in my system other than what's supposed to be in there. So they knew that something wasn't right when I was calling asking to have all this stuff added to the blood work. And then I showed up at the third party facility and I told their lab what happened to me. And I stated, my condition, what I've had going on, like why I have the prescriptions that I have, and then like what's actually going on with me. And then I told them, my mother's criminal actions and what she's been doing in the background all these years. And I'm pretty sure that this is what happened here. And this woman added somebody else's pee to my cup, which is why the lines, they're not fully coming through or they're not fully missing. It's because the full sample didn't come from just me. That's why. And so I told her all that. And she notated everything I said when she sent the sample off to the lab. So when the lab got it, they took everything this woman said in the notes and they came back with a full description of why my prescription turns from Norco to morphine when checked for in the urine. So she came back with the science behind it and why it shows up that way. And so this is literally about 24 hours later that I go to get this test, the additional test, because I couldn't get it any sooner than that. It couldn't have been done any sooner because of the time of day it was. The day prior was already 4 p.m. And then I'm living really far away. It took a whole 24 hours. Doesn't really matter. If I was really doing all those drugs, it would have showed up in real life. So it was as soon as I could get it done, I did this. This woman explained everything, and basically said, this is all that's in her system. These are her regular scripts. And this is why it shows up this way on your test, because it's you're checking for metabolites. That's why it shows up that way. And it didn't show any of the other substances on the other card that shouldn't have been in my system. It didn't show any of those. So when that detailed that woman's perspective of who went over it at the lab, who also took the woman who took my bloods report and then factored in everything mixed with what she saw, and she gave a full detailed report on that, and then I turned that into the court. Nobody was expecting me to run off and go get my own third party drug test and be able to back up reality and prove that my test had been tampered with. Nobody was expecting me to do that. But because I've been dealing with my mother's tactics for so many decades, I knew exactly what had to happen and I knew what was going on in the background. So I was able to disprove this falsified drug test and prove that that was never the situation. And then her excuse in court was that I had done the drugs in between the time that I got the drug test a couple days prior, the regular one I have every month, and that I had done them between that time and 3 days later when I got the third party test. And or 2 days, so before I got the test that they took. She was claiming that I did the drugs in that 2-day period. And by that third day, when I went and got my private test, that it had already left my system, which that's not true, because all that stuff wouldn't just leave your system in like 18 hours, if that were truly the case. So that was her excuse when she was confronted in court about tampering with the sample. But then going forward, there was all these problems with this woman and me being on probation for so long. The amount of time I was on probation got extended by an additional like 12 to 18 months. I want to say it was like at least 12 months. It was more than 12 months. It got extended by over 12 months because then I was ordered to do all this community service, which I can't do. I can't even incorporate daily functioning into my life from my initial injury. I'm still living in the initial medical emergency, still trying to pick up regular pieces of daily life. And the only reason I had some of it prior was because I had people working for me. That's the only reason I was able to do what I was doing when I was, and it was still extremely limited. So, with all of that being added to my plate, and I tried to explain this to numerous people along the way, that I'm still in the initial medical emergency. I'm not supposed to be working. If I didn't continue to work, we would have already lost our lives. We're still paying to stay alive. And then we're forced away from our home due to this severe condition, due to Ford Motor Company spilling all that gasoline. I'm living in extreme chaos. I'm supposed to be resting, recovering, treating. I'm supposed to be in a sterile environment. And I'm having trouble just even getting from point A to point B. So at this point, this was shortly after my dad had become injured. And now at this point, I was the one mainly getting to him every night and getting him dinner every night. But what started to happen was because I couldn't even get back and forth. I spent an entire year on my friend's couch. And that's how I managed to get to my dad, because I couldn't get back and forth. Um, and then I was still able to just barely work on the weekends, but having this blower, having to blow into it, and it's disrupting my sleep, and it's making me very unwell, and it's like causing problems, the already existing problems I'm having, and it's adding to the problems I have with the brain injuries. And then we have re-exposures as we're trying to get through life and barely hold it all together. It's slowly taking me out. So I'm losing functioning. I'm still needing to treat once a week just to remove what I'm taking in each week to barely keep holding things together at this point, knowing I have to get back to full treatment 5 days a week in order to move forward with sealing the brain tissue shut, removing the rest of the carbon monoxide, getting myself to a more like physically stable place. I knew that had to go on going forward. And in the meantime, here I was just barely holding on each week, doing the one treatment per week at this time. And with what they're trying to tell me I needed to do, I already knew from day one I couldn't do that. That's why I said all this up front. I already knew that wasn't possible. Everybody's still looking at me based on what I look like, not the reality of my situation, not what I have going on, not what I've been through, not the extreme state that we're in. This is still a medical emergency. We can't just travel from point A to point B. We're both very sick. This isn't just me. This is me and my son. My son is homeschooled because of this. So we can't just, and we're at this time, we're forced away from our home. We had to like completely remove ourselves from the entire area and go live an hour away. So when they were trying to tell me I had to do all this stuff, I'm already like thinking that's not even going to be able to happen. Like if I can't even do laundry, what makes you think that any of this is even going to be incorporated into my life when I'm barely holding on as it is? And I'm barely like holding those couple days a week that I'm working, barely holding that together, and barely just to keep the treatment going and keep everything running. Adding one more thing to it, it's going to completely take me out. That's going to cause us to lose everything, and then we lose our lives. I already knew that that's where we were at that time in 2023, and nobody was listening to me. Nobody was living in reality about any of this. And so the community service was never gotten to, which I already knew. I already knew it wasn't going to be able to be getting to. And then on top of it, I had an additional brain injury. I'd say less than a week after I was ordered to do this community service, I fell over dead at Walmart. I had cracked my head open. It was from the wildfire particles in the air and me just traveling from point A to point B during that. Because, like I said, there's times we can't even travel around. I was dead on the floor at Walmart, cracked my head open, lost several pints of blood from the head, was unresponsive for 15 minutes, came back on my own, and then was taken to the hospital, but then later on kicked out without any medical intervention, without any help, because they're still on the cover up of the initial injury, and they also have the majority of the falsified records that my mother's involved in putting in that system. So that happened a few days later. And then in order to kind of get recovered from that re-injury on top of the already existing condition and where I had got myself to at that point, now we have a very significant re-injury. And another point where I had died and came back, again, without medical intervention. And still here I'm getting no help, no rest, no recovery, no treatment. And now I'm living really far away, and now my head has been cracked off the ground, and now I have an open head wound on top of the fact that I fell over from all oxygen being cut off from my brain from the wildfire particles just from breathing them in. So it was 2 brain injuries in one is how that happened. And that had all happened literally a couple days after I was ordered all this stuff that I already couldn't do. So then now I'm expected to do all this stuff, but then these people are all operating as if, well, if that's really your situation, you would have gotten help in the medical system. And nobody's comprehending what I deal with in the reality of my situation, how this is not being treated within the medical system. It never was. There are a lot of crimes going on, and why this has happened to me. I'm not ever going to be able to get treatment in the medical system. If I can't get treatment brought in dead, what makes you think that these people are ever going to help me? When I was near death all those times trying to seek treatment before finding the private center, not one person tried to help me. So no, there isn't going to be proper documentation and proper treatment, and you're not going to see what you want to see on paper, because these are a lot of crimes that have been going on. So when all that got ordered to me, I wasn't able to complete any of it. And after having that significant injury, re-injury to my head, deep down inside where my ears connect to my brain, it hurt real bad for about 8 months or so following that, until I had enough paid for out of pocket treatments at the center to repair that part to a better, get things back to a more normalized, not normalized, but where I was before that additional re-injury, trying to get things back to where I was before that, on top of the fact that I was still treating the initial injury. So all of that happened to me, and I wasn't able to barely get through each week, because now I've taken a significant step back. Now I've still got this stupid blower, and now I'm being woken up in my sleep after an additional brain injury. So now we're looking at 4 brain injuries at this point. Very severe ones, not mild ones, not moderate ones. These are all very severe. And so again, more further, no rest, recovery, no proper treatment. Eventually I did still pay for enough treatment to where I was kind of able to inch forward a little bit, kind of almost to where I was prior to that re-injury. But it took about 8 months of sporadic treatments. I was no longer able to continue to do them weekly. Once that injury happened, I wasn't able to continue to work enough to produce that money to keep treating weekly the way I had the entire injury. So at this point, it had been, 4.5 years of treatment I had been under, and I wasn't able to maintain. This was the first time I was unable to maintain. It had never gotten to that point yet, from the beginning of the injury, from beginning treatment to that day. So that all played a big role in the significant decline of what was going on. And nobody wanted to believe that this is really my reality. I really can't do all these things. Now I even further can't do any of these things. And now I'm slipping away. So then I got ordered to have the blower even longer. By the time I was done giving it back, it was time for my son to start school again for that next school year. And I was just slowly slipping away. There was so much on my plate, having to maintain financially everything, that I was just slowly slipping away. And at the same time, the damage to my house occurred at that time. So that played another role in the circumstances that all came out of that, and the crimes that came out of that, added to my already overloaded plate as well. And now, with me being so already injured and then significantly re-injured, here I was just struggling through each week, knowing I'm losing functioning. I'm losing the ability to maintain what part of my income I was maintaining. And my next stream of income was already set in place to come back to that home and turn that home into an Airbnb and be on to my next home. Those circumstances were already set in place years in advance. The work on the home had already been done. And she was only in the home 12 months when all this happened. And soon I was getting ready to come back and make those plans move forward and continue on with my next stream of income so I could fully retire, because I knew I was coming up on not being able to maintain doing what I was doing, maintain my stream of entertainment income. It was very hard to do with all those brain injuries, with the systemic injury and everything I was doing. But it was also the only way I was going to keep us alive and maintain everything financially. So I knew I had very limited time, that my next business moves the steps had to be taken. And then all of this came at me at one time. And now here I'm left significantly more re-injured. And then there was an additional brain injury a couple months later as well. So this whole time I've been on probation. Now at this point, I was supposed to be off probation for a while, and then it traveled into 2025. So I stayed on probation into 2025. So this is something that happened in 2022, in the summer of 2022. And then I stayed on probation from the beginning of 2023, basically to the beginning of 2025. It was not supposed to be anywhere near that long. They kept prolonging it based on all these things that were going on, and nobody was listening to the reality of anything that I had going on. And each person was adding to the bucket of problems when I was already in a pretty extreme state just to stay alive. So that continued on with the harassment and the probation officer. She was literally doing this every month. Hold on one second. Okay. So the amount of probation time I ended up doing was a really long period of time. And it was all based on discrimination due to my disability, due to what I look like. Because now at this point, I'm going in there every month, and it was causing me to lose about 1 to 2 days every month of mental and emotional distress of this woman repeating my mother's delusions to me every time I'd sit down with her each month, her telling me basically how I need to go do this community service, how I'm not really injured, I'm fine due to what I look like and what my son looks like. Like literally, these were her words, what we look like. We're fine because of what we look like. Not what we've actually been through, not what we actually have going on, not our extreme physical injuries we've been suffering from. And you're basing your opinion on us based on a delusional phone call from a deranged old lady, not anything to do with reality, not anything to do with what we actually have going on. So that violates several laws right there, and for the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's several violations right there, because what I look like has nothing to do with how severely injured we are and what we actually have going on. So if you're basing your judgment on me on what I look like, you're looking at a lifetime of me maintaining my health, maintaining my body, and only putting clean ingredients into my body for decades prior to me becoming injured. So what you're looking at when you look at me right now in this video, or a couple years ago at this point, doesn't matter. You're looking at the results of long-term me maintaining my health in my body and my appearance, and me working very hard to maintain that, and like have a very healthy lifestyle all prior to me becoming injured. Because if I had not done all that prior to me becoming injured, we probably wouldn't have survived the injuries, first of all. But because I was that healthy and I put all that work into myself, that's part of how we got to survive our injuries. And that's why I look like what I look like today, and why I looked like this a couple years ago. I look this way because of the work that I put in long term prior to the injury. So it doesn't matter that you're judging me on what I look like, or because someone calling you repeatedly claiming to be my mother is telling you that my injuries are not real. I'm making the whole thing up. I've always had a mental disorder, a drug problem, blah, 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 blah. They're conversing with each other regularly at this point. I was very well aware of this. I could tell by the things she was saying to me. I could tell by the messages I was relaying to her. And I could tell that that's what's going on. And I know that this happens to me. It's been happening my entire life, that she's always able to insert herself, place delusional phone calls, and people act strange toward me and they live on a false narrative. So I've been dealing with that forever. So I can tell immediately when somebody is doing that. So that is what happened. And I explained from the beginning what all happened to me, and how these are serious issues. And she ignored all of it, doesn't want to believe that we live modified lives, doesn't want to believe that this is really my situation, that I've had all these brain injuries, that I'm living with my brain tissue raw and open underneath my scalp. I've been living that way since the beginning of 2018. She doesn't want to believe any of that. Doesn't want to believe my son has the same severe injuries as me because of what he looked like. Well, he was born that way. And I've put us through almost $200,000 in out-of-pocket treatments where we are today. That's why we look the way we look currently, or a couple years ago. That's why we look that way, because of what I've put us through. But nobody saw what we went through the extreme part. And even in, a couple years ago, when this is going on and all the way to the current, there's still ongoing effects. I suffer these ongoing effects every second of every day. Just because I look like this doesn't mean my brain tissue isn't raw and open and swollen. Doesn't mean that we can take in particles from the outside world. That's the whole reason we're living in another house that I own temporarily for this period of time, because of our injuries. Otherwise, that wouldn't have happened. Because I know at the same time, here's my mother calling people, telling them that I couldn't afford my house, other people pay my bills, and other people stopped paying my bills, and that's why I had to go live in a trailer in Ohio. Well, nobody's listening to the reality of the situation. People are just believing whatever she's saying, because she's also at the root of us not receiving treatment initially, which caused all these problems and caused us to be forced away from our home. So no one's living in reality here. This woman is taking my mother's delusional phone calls every step of the way, repeatedly throughout the whole probation process. And she still keeps jumping to the other page of the delusions that she's told by my mother every time I'm seeing her every month this is going on. So it literally got to the point where I was losing 2 days every month to prepare to go see her, deal with the harassment and the bullying and the bullshit and the delusion she's living on, and her telling me how I'm not injured, or acting like I'm not injured and telling me I can do this and I can do that because of the way I look. Well, guess what? I can't do all those things. If I could, I would already have a mainstream of income on top of my entertainment income in my real estate investments, the way I had all those years prior to the injury. If that were truly the case, that's what I would have going on. And I've never been able to restore that or daily functioning from the initial injury. I spiraled to where I am every step of the way, being harassed and all these problems occurring, and my mother being at the root of amplifying each set of circumstances. I've been struggling and spiraling through each step of the way to get me to where I was in that current day. But she just wanted to continue on to say, how I'm not injured in the manner in which I am. And because of the way I look, I can just go ahead and do all these things that they want me to do. So that's highly illegal. Stephanie Pride is um, directly involved in all of these crimes against me, with my mother calling her for about a 2-year period regularly. All of the harassment that I dealt with every month, her saying that I can do all this stuff that I can't do just based on what I look like or what my son looks like, not wanting to believe our reality, because the proof is actually in the pudding. If you pick apart the things I'm saying are going on and you pick apart our actual lives and why my son is homeschooled, why we've been forced from our main home, why we're temporarily in my other home, why all these things have happened, because of that injury, because that injury is so extreme. And then here I am producing different medical documents along the way. And she's completely ignoring them, acting like these aren't real. And then there was a several month period where she was trying to say that Charmaine's documents, she was acting like Charmaine was not real, or that I pay her to write false documents, something along those lines. Because now this has happened numerous times with numerous different people, different facilities along the way. My mother's been telling people either Charmaine is not real or that I pay her to write false documentation. And in the beginning, so Stephanie Pride did not want to accept any of Charmaine's documents. So she's involved because of all the crimes, and she's documenting every step of the way all of these crimes. She had been involved for years at this point. Here's my mother telling her she's not real, or I pay her to write this false document, or I have this mental disorder, that's why she's involved. And here she is writing statements on reality along with my primary doctor, and she's ignoring them. But in the very beginning, she also disregarded the first like 3 or 4 months worth of emails and reports that Charmaine was sending her, proving that like I do a weekly like therapy session, let's just call it, because that's what it's billed as. But really, she has to be involved because she's got to keep documenting all the crimes every step of the way, and the crimes happen at such an extravagant rate that we really do have to talk every week. And sometimes it's more than once a week because there's so much chaos and so many crimes that happen that sometimes it is more than once a week. So here she is sending the documentation that, yeah, I'm being seen every week. It has nothing to do with me having a mental disorder or drug problem. I have to see her because of all of these crimes, and somebody has to document it. I need somebody firsthand to see what's going on, the actual fallout, and to document facts, because I also can't make police reports because the police are involved in the crimes. And so here she's been involved all these years at this point. But I mean, she really is saying like, yeah, I've been seeing her every week all these years. Like, what you're saying is the problem isn't a problem. Those things aren't even problems. That's not what we're dealing with here. And then so she didn't try to explain it to the woman, like knowing the woman's operating on the other side for my mother. We're aware of this, So she's not trying to explain it to her. She's just trying to send her the documents like that. Yes, she's complying with this portion of what you're asking her to do. I've already been involved for years, but yes, she's complying with all of this. Like, I don't see any reason to drug test her. She's not on drugs, because then this has come at her from numerous different people along the way over the years, that they get told I'm on drugs or have a mental disorder. Then those people reach out to Charmaine as well. And then she tells them, no, I don't have to drug test her. I don't need to. She's saying those things because she knows me, and she knows that that's not what's going on. But that's what was going on during the whole probation incident. Here for months, she's disregarding her emails, trying to act like I'm not complying with what they want me to do or whatever. And what it is, it's because of my mother's delusional phone calls and whatever bullshit she's feeding her. She's operating as if that's reality. So she was disregarding all of her emails as well. And then it reached a point where I then started emailing and carbon copying her in the emails, and submitted the report to her from myself, from Charmaine myself, and sent it to the probation officer, then carbon copied Charmaine. And because there was so much of this going on with many agencies and such, and my mother's at the root of all of it, I started carbon copying Charmaine with many things that were going on, because that's my proof that these people received the information, no matter what the situation was. So here we were every month. Here I'm carbon copying her and then sending her monthly report for her, carbon copying Charmaine and sending it to the probation officer, because here she's trying to say that she never received it. She didn't get it. And she did it for several months. And she's doing that based off my mother's delusional phone calls and whatever she's telling her, either that she's not real or that I'm paying her to write the documentation, not anything to do with facts or reality. So That's what was actually going on. And finally, once I sent it carbon copied, that's when she finally acknowledged that she received it. Oh, you received it now, huh? But you didn't receive it all those other times. So remember a couple of videos ago when I was talking about the Monroe County front of the court, because now this is the same courthouse, same county. We actually have nothing to do with Monroe County. This is so strange that they were even involved in both situations. But that department was also trying to say they weren't receiving Charmaine's documents either, because my mother was also calling them as well. So yes, there's been many different circumstances where I've carbon copied Charmaine in these documents, and so like that way we have the proof. We both have it in our email that yes, this was sent on this day and time because she's in it too, or I'm in it too, and then we're all in the same thread. So now we have the proof it's been sent. So let somebody keep saying how they're not receiving it, and as soon as that happens, when I involve her as the carbon copy, all of these people and agencies suddenly receive it. Okay, but you weren't receiving it before, right? So that went on for a very long time. It should have never been a 2-year situation. And like the fallout of all that going on and that additional harassment on top of everything I already deal with and the extreme parts of the injury, like we were literally just coming out of the extreme part, but still extremely fragile. These are all still serious issues. We still can't have any setbacks, exposures. We do still have to shelter in place. All these things were still factors. And then the fallout of all that going on led to a further decline in my condition, my overall condition, and the recovery I was making with all those injuries and re-injuries and the brain injuries. And then systemically, it added to the problem. And then I slid further backwards, losing my ability to work as much, losing the ability to maintain doing what little bit I was maintaining, and then even further, not getting daily functioning back even further. Those things are even further gone today. So from that point to where we are today, I've significantly lost a lot more functioning, especially due to there being a couple additional brain injuries. And then me losing my paid help, because then at some point I couldn't afford to pay somebody to work for me no more, because I'm also losing the ability to work and treat. And now for the past year, the treatment center has been closed. So that's an additional issue because I'm not working with the better chamber anymore. I'm working with my home chamber, and I only get so much functioning out of using the home chamber. It only works so well until I'm able to afford an upgraded one. So those were all issues. And so the whole probation sentencing, the charges itself, how I even got the charges, it's all part of the crimes. It's all part of the organized crime and the setup. It's part of it each step of the way. And then my mother calling the probation department and getting this woman involved in the crimes and attempting to have me locked up based on a false drug test, trying to make it look like I've always had this problem. Because if you look at my criminal record, it looks like I have 3 DUIs, and I don't. I don't truly have 3 DUIs. There is truly 1 DUI, and I was slightly over the limit a long time ago, back in 2010. So the other ones aren't true actual crimes that happen. These crimes were orchestrated to happen, and they were orchestrated to play out that way. And the other one was way prior to, it wasn't actually a DUI. So I can get into this when I talk about my criminal record in a separate video down the line. I will get there and explain a lot of it, because a lot of what's on there shouldn't be on there. My mother was able to insert herself in every single set of circumstances regarding my criminal record or causing it to happen directly from behind the scenes. And that's how I had gotten such a lengthy criminal record, although none of that should have ever been the case. So the entire situation was a setup from day one, how I even got this DUI. And then when you add to it, like each step along the way and each person participating in the crimes, each person's actions added to the problems that were already ongoing. And here I'm still living in the initial medical emergency, still treating the initial medical emergency. And here I am barely hanging on. And these people are causing all these problems intentionally for me in the state that I'm already in, suffering, just barely holding on financially, barely holding on physically. And I did have a good flow of money going. However, if the Ford gas leak had not happened and forced me from my home, financially, I wouldn't have been all set back in the manner in which I was. That is the significant incident that caused the huge financial setback, that and the damage to my home and the person who did the damage throwing away the checks. So if that had not all happened, how I was building and providing after the injury and everything I was doing, it would have maintained its flow. I wouldn't have been extremely disrupted and taken a huge financial loss. That wouldn't have happened, even if I was still paying for treatment out of pocket, which I was. None of that would have happened. So it's every step along the way. Each person adds to it, and it gets to the point where it's past the point of no return, and then I can't come out of it because it's just problem after problem after problem. I'm only one person. Now you're talking 20, 30 people adding to the bucket of problems when I'm very physically fragile. My brain is extremely fragile. Coming out of a medical emergency, don't have daily functioning, living a modified life, can't even travel out and about in the world from point A to point B. Every step along the way was orchestrated. It was planned. These people are involved in the crimes. They're involved in my mother's little criminal group of people who've all been participating in this. So that's what's actually gone on. And none of it should have ever gotten to that degree where I was then left just permanently taken out completely, and not able to pick up any pieces. So, after I had that additional brain injury in the summer of 2023, so that's about 2.5 years ago, I've never been able to pick up the pieces from there because there was still too much on my plate going forward. And I still hadn't regained any daily functioning from previous to that, that I just slipped further and further away. And each person and agency adding to the pile of problems I was already in. And then me just sitting here trying to dig my way out, dig my way out. And all I'm doing is digging my way out. And that's what's been going on the last couple of years, digging my way out, digging my way out. That's literally what I've been doing 100% of my time, on top of the continuous effects that I suffer from and the injuries I'm suffering from and what I have to deal with every day, and then trying to treat those. And I have to lay down a lot every day as well. So I can't just go about my day and like, oh yeah, I'm just like a regular person, like how all these people think I am. I'm not. And people don't realize that. Even the people who want to call themselves my friends don't realize that. Because currently I see a lot of them online talking a lot of shit, making posts and such on Facebook, and you can tell that those are directed at me without talking to me. But what it is it's jealousy and envy about the level I'm on in life, and the work they haven't done to be where I am in life. And because I have all these severe injuries and circumstances, they're not living in reality about what I've been through either. And they just see what I have, and they're operating, making like comments about how they perceive it when they don't even have proper information, because nobody was around me during the extreme part of the injury or saw what we went through. There was no support system. There was no help. There was nobody here. So how can anybody have any opinion on it when you weren't around? Um, but yeah, like I said in a different video, that's why I've removed pretty much everyone who I considered like my friend. I had no choice, because these people aren't truly friends. And if you were truly a friend, then you would have been here helping me when I was fighting for my life. So, yeah, that's kind of what's led to the current day. Stephanie Pride played a huge role in what had gone on, adding somebody else's pee to my drug test, thinking like I'm sure my mother offered her some type of bribe. So like, yeah, as long as you get her sent to prison, then we're good, and I'll be able to pay you X amount of dollars because I'll be able to get access to the rest of this trust fund. And that's what they were going for. That's what was actually going on at that time. So, you know, she played a large role. That's kind of where it started, and where I noticed there was an issue right away. That's how I knew my mother was placing the delusional phone calls. The fact that she felt that she could get away with adding somebody else's urine with a bunch of drugs in it to my cup and then come out with a fraudulent test, that told me right away she was involved. I already know how my mother operates. I already knew she would be placing delusional phone calls to her regularly. That's what she's done all my life. So I was already aware of that. And then every step of the way she told on herself. And every time I was sitting down with her, and she's operating on a different page than reality. And then she's also, repeatedly talking about what I look like and what my son looks like has nothing to do with our reality and our medical injuries and what we've been through and what we're still going through. Our lives are still modified. They will be for the rest of our lives. And this woman was sitting here making all these judgmental calls, still trying to lock me up in prison the whole time. You could tell that was her agenda. So you could tell that that's what she took the bribe to do, because you could tell every step of the way. Here she kept trying to throw me in jail every step of the way, trying to say, well, you have to do this or you're going to jail. You have to do this and you have to do this. Okay, you're asking me to do the impossible. You're asking me to do things that can't be done. None of this can be added to what I have going on. And so it became a problem, and she just kept operating as if I'm not in the predicament I'm in. I don't have these serious matters going on and like I can just go out and live a regular life. And then she just kept acting like my situation wasn't my situation. So every step of the way she told on herself, because every month here she goes right back to the delusional page. So now she's operating on the delusional page every step of the way. And it just kept going on and on and on. And then here it eventually lands back in court. And then I could tell by how this played out in court that I could tell like the judge wasn't involved, but I could tell by what she said in court that day that that's what she was going for. And that's what she wanted to happen. You could tell because she had a couple of very snood remarks where she just acted like, well, she didn't even try, or she can do it. She just didn't try. She didn't even try. Like, well, no, I can't try. It can't even be incorporated in. None of that can be incorporated in to what I already have going on in the extreme position I'm already in. Like, if I do one thing too much in regular life, let's just say the work I'm doing inside my home and I do too much, I'm then wiped out for several days. And so at this time, I was still working every weekend to barely hold everything together, to continue to pay for the treatment, to hold everything I have together. And mind you, at no point going forward am I ever going to be able to go back and work for somebody else. So I know that what I'm working on has to continue forward because I also don't have the ability to rebuild. And the second that that's lost and my income and my finances and what I've been building along the way and how I've held on, the second that that's gone, everything's gone and we still lose our lives. Or at this point, I still lose my life. That's the end result. So she's not comprehending any of what was going on, still acting like, well, I can just go do this, or she didn't even try. She can just go do all this stuff. No, I can't go do all that stuff. None of that's ever been able to be incorporated back into my life. If I've never been able to incorporate dishes or laundry back in my life from like 5 or 6 years at that point, what makes you think that if I can't even do that, what makes you think that I can incorporate something that you're asking me to do that's not possible to do? And you could tell by the way she was relaying the information to the judge. And she was the way she was acting, like she definitely was like, well, she can do it. And then she kept saying something about the way I look. But you could tell she was jealous of what I look like the way I look and the aura I have, the vibe I give off, like how I don't wear makeup and like what I look like. You could tell she was very jealous of that. And a lot of women are. It doesn't matter how I meet them or if I don't know them at all, a lot of women are. So I could tell she had that already, plus what my mother had been telling her was coming out of her mouth there in the courtroom. And you could tell she was just acting like, well, I can go do all this stuff. I just didn't try. No, like, okay, so you clearly don't comprehend brain injuries, especially the extreme ones that I've had, and being left with no treatment, no help, and like barely holding on to life for many years, and then paying your own way out to be able to barely work the little bit that I was, and it took many years and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So here she was just acting like I could go do all this stuff, which I couldn't. And then here I'm just sitting there, and I made sure I did my hair that day, and I looked like pretty much like I do in this video. I looked this way that day because I wanted the judge to be able to see that because then I sent an email to her to back up what she said to me in person about what I look like and how I can do all these things because of what I look like. Well, I forwarded that email. So I wanted him to see how she was reacting, and it had to do with the way I look because she's jealous of the way I look because she doesn't have the good looks that I have naturally. So I wanted him to see that, and then I forwarded the email, and then I showed up looking like this. And I'm not joking. Like I wake up in a continuous state of suffering. I have to do a lot of things every day to barely get a little bit functional. Sometimes I don't get functional. Sometimes I can't get anything done. So it depends on like different exposures and such. But I wake up that way every day. I'm not joking about anything I'm saying. It's not a laughing matter. I live suffering. So somebody that's living suffering like that isn't joking, isn't laughing. I had a dead straight look on my face because I'm forced to live this way, and I've been this way for years. So he saw, based on the way the words came out of her mouth that day in the courtroom, that she was truly jealous of what I looked like. Regardless if he knew that my mother was placing delusional phone calls and she's in on all this bullshit and that original drug test was falsified. He was aware there was something wrong with that original drug test after I said it left my line of sight for about 30 seconds. And then I went and got my own drug test on top of already having a previous one a couple days prior. He already knew there was something fishy about the situation. I don't think he's involved whatsoever. But you could tell his reaction when she was telling him what she was telling him regarding me, and then he's looking at me and he's looking at her and he's looking at the attitude she has and the manner in which she's saying things. He could clearly see that she was jealous of what I look like, or the level I'm on in life, because I'm on a different level than most like criminal people on probation, let's just say, in that area. So I don't really know all over, but in that area, you could tell the majority of these people legit had a drug problem or an alcohol problem or something, or they really commit all these crimes. They really do have all these issues. Those aren't the type of issues that I have. And you could tell that the level I'm on in life and how I produce my own income and what I've been through, and then I have receipts for all of this stuff. He could tell that I wasn't like the average like criminal in front of the judge, just based on what he had saw over those 2 years and what she was trying to tell him, and then the proof I had that day. He could see that there was some jealousy and envy going on at the bottom of all of it, regardless of him knowing anything to do with my mother's situation or not. In the delusional phone call placing, doesn't matter. He could see with his own eyes in that moment, based on my receipts, what I look like, what I've had going on, and then what she's saying, that there's an issue with her behavior toward me, and that she just wanted to see me locked up is what it was. So he ended up dismissing the whole thing, especially because I did all that additional time, which wasn't like necessary on probation. And then yeah, like yeah, I wanted to forward the email to him, because the day that it happened, where she stated all that stuff to my face, I sent her an email like a day later, because in that conversation she was trying to force me to go do probation, and then she was basically giving me an ultimatum, like, you have to do this or you have to do this, and I said, I can't. Like, you're not comprehending anything. That's why I said all this from the very beginning. And so, no, at no point during this time, she's not comprehending anything I'm saying. And that's why I responded with the email and said, well, it's not fair that you say this to me, or because of what I look like or what my son looks like, because that goes against the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you're trying to disregard our injuries, what we've been through, what we have going on. It's not something that can be gone around. It's not, well, you want me to do this or this, pick one. It's not optional. If I can't even do my own dishes or my own laundry, and I'm barely holding on to barely get to work, like 10% of the time I used to prior to my injury, to barely hold it all together, pay for everything myself, I don't know how you think that either one of those is possible when it's not possible to do. So I responded in the email directly after, so I'd have the proof of what she said to me, because I didn't have the proof that she said all that. What I did is I responded in an email with what she had said to me in person. And then she didn't argue back or say she didn't say any of those things. She actually responded, validating that she said all those things to me. So that's what I fished her in with the email to basically back up that she said all that to me. But it wasn't possible to do what they were asking to do. And I knew that from day one. And then I had the additional injury right after, like really putting the stamp on it. I already knew, like, where I was in that place, it wasn't going to be able to happen. I was quite a ways away in treatment, away from where I needed to be, to ever incorporate that in. I would have been, now we're looking at something different because the treatment center is closed. But let's just say it was still open and I was treating 5 days a week. It would still take me 3 to 5 years of daily treatment, with how I'm building things, how I run things, and how I have to generate my money and everything going on due to my injuries. It would still take me 3 to 5 years of everyday treatment, where we are today, in order to ever get to a place where I could incorporate any small amount of what they were asking me to do into my daily life, or into my life at all. So yeah, that's what happened regarding all of those matters. And Stephanie Pride is involved in the crimes and taking the delusional phone calls from my mother. And I'm pretty sure she may have taken a bribe, or if she didn't, it's because my mother made her feel some sense of power by harassing me and like acting this way toward me every month. And it was making her feel like on top by talking to me in this manner, acting like I just have this mental disorder of making everything up, and made her feel really powerful. But I truly believe that she's possibly one of the ones that took the bribe, just based on like how long it went on and what all happened initially with the falsified drug test, and just the way she kept operating so heavily on a different page than reality, that I'm pretty sure that like she did take the bribe. So she's another person that needs to be looked into. Regardless, she still committed several crimes during this, going against the Americans with Disabilities Act. Number one, there's several violations there: falsifying a drug test, lying in court, acting like I did all these things I didn't do, or I didn't do what I was supposed to because you don't want to believe I'm injured. Well, that's just delusional, because these are facts. This is reality. This can all be proven. Just because you don't want to live in reality doesn't make me have the mental disorder. That makes you have the mental disorder. So this goes for many people along the way, because there's been a lot of people, like I said, all these different situations have happened. But yeah, that was this particular situation, and Stephanie Pride needs to be looked into and fired. And she also needs to be charged for her role in the crimes and the harassment and dragging out all these additional problems. Because remember, at the root, the whole DUI was a setup. There shouldn't have been any charges at any point. So hopefully I can get more into why and explain to the rest of the population why at some point. But right now I have to keep some of these facts private. And I will be back with more, because I'm going to talk about how the attorney on the case was also paid a bribe to participate in these crimes and get himself put on my case. So I will be back with more on all of that. Thanks. Bye.